but thank you so much for joining. I think Stuart and I are particularly excited for this conversation. I don't know how many people know this, and Veronica knows this, but part of the reason Stuart and I even started to think about founding Thousand Fell 3 years ago was because of a really early experience with biofabrication, cellular agriculture, and material innovation. And those are words that hopefully we're going to get into and discuss today. But it was 4 or 5 years ago, I was working at Gap Inc. and I was on the strategy team when Gap had invested in a company called Bolt Threads, and they had a synthetic spider silk. And Gap had created a bulletproof denim jacket. And so that was denim, which is cotton, Kevlar, and spider silk. And it was bulletproof, but it felt just like cotton, and it blew my mind. And I was like, this is the future. What can we do? And then I was in this frustrating situation where we really couldn't do much because we were so focused on keeping costs down in my role over knit tops. And so part of Stuart and my journey has been we joined a couple of material innovation libraries in Paris and New York, and we started making sandals out of pineapple fabric in 2015 or 16, and just started testing. And Thousand Fell came to be from that. And Thousand Fell actually means a multiplicity of new material. And so it's people like Rodrigo and Susan and Veronica who are investing in and making and creating new materials that will only enable us to continue to build products like Thousand Fell. And so we're not really going to speak about Thousand Fell at all anymore, but I wanted to share that because this kind of launched our journey. So that said, I think the first thing we wanted to do is just give each host a chance to introduce themselves and their work, and just have like 2 to 3 minutes to just talk about what you do in relation to material innovation and who you are. And who should we start with? Susan?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk a little bit about Modern Meadow and who we are. Modern Meadow is a biofabrication company. We integrate design, biology, and materials science to transform the material world without compromising nature. So at our heart, we're really just inspired by traditional materials, but we really want to make more sustainable materials. So our scientists have been hard at work developing a process by which they can build materials really from the ground up. And we really want to use the building blocks of nature. So we've developed multiple ways to put proteins together. So proteins are the building blocks of nature. Collagen is one protein that's found in nature. It's the most abundant protein, and it's the protein building block of your skin, and ultimately, therefore, leather. So that was kind of initially our inspiration, with the idea of, not looking to really imitate nature, but to be inspired by it and try to build natural materials, but in a way that's very controlled and that can be purposeful, and design them from the very beginning. So that's a bit about Modern Meadow. Our first product will be launched under a branded platform, which we call ZOA. And we're looking to launch first products later on this year. And my role at Modern Meadow is that I'm the head of business development. So I work closely with our external partners. We're in the very lucky position, I would say, because we haven't been a stealth company, have been approached by many, many top brands. So really I work at the interface with those brands, determining what are the best opportunities and what is the right go-to-market strategy. And then working closely to coordinate what success might look like as those brands start to rethink materials, and coordinating that with our development efforts to create a product roadmap and ultimately commercialize product.
Fantastic. And just totally anecdotal, Stuart and I had the opportunity to go to the Modern Meadow lab, and I'm sure Susan will get into it, but it's incredible what they're working on, creating collagen out of yeast. So like the idea is animal-free, cruelty-free leather. Veronica, would you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Veronica. So our I'm third generation in the apparel space. My grandfather started with knitwear manufacturing, so I grew up going to all the knitwear factories and also denim factories. And back then, I was asking, "Why is it so dusty? Why is it so smelly?" And it was just kind of the way things were. Um, and after university, I started working in brands and bringing mass market brands to China, and launched 12 brands in the China market, opening 1,000 stores. And at that time, it was just the way things were. But 6 years ago, I started learning about sustainability. And once I started learning about it, I'm like, oh, we have to do something. We have to change. And through my family's various different types of investments, including in Modern Meadow, I was my eyes just opened and found out all these amazing materials and cool stories and all these interesting things out there. So 4 months ago, 5 months almost now, I set off to launch my own brand, which we try to incorporate as many material science fabrics as much as possible. Definitely sustainable. We're sustainable down to our buttons. The brand is on pause for the moment because of coronavirus, but it is. We have a lot of interesting fabrics and materials, and we're exploring to use even more. So we'll definitely talk about it as we go. But definitely been in fashion for a while, and will continue to be in this space. But I also have a lot of hope for what we can do in the fashion space once we make some changes.
Awesome. And then Rodrigo.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Rodrigo. So I run a small little design practice called Nuova, but my background's in industrial design. So I've been working in the design field for about 10 years now. And I was first kind of introduced to the idea of sustainability in 2009, I believe, with Cradle to Cradle. So, I mean, I think back in the day, it was quite a relatively new idea of a circular economy and what it means to be circular. But that was kind of my journey started there. Kind of working in the professional field. I worked in automotive for many years, developing materials specifically. So most previously I was at Tesla, doing all their advanced material development. So, Susan and I know each other as well. We tried to do some stuff back then, but even then it was kind of an early time. This was, I think, 2017, and trying to figure out ways to scale up these technologies and apply them to more of like a mass industry. But yeah, a lot of our efforts with our company are focused on helping smaller brands and businesses kind of transition to more of a bio-based future. Helping them on both design and material fronts, helping them create strategies, helping them kind of design materials for manufacturing as well, and also partnering with brands in more collaborative efforts to kind of make this transition to more of a bio-based future.
Awesome. And just really quick, just so everyone knows, the reason we thought this conversation would be fruitful was we have kind of like one representative of the textile material innovation space, that's Susan in Modern Meadow. We have materials designer, advanced materials designer, Rodrigo, and how he's working with different brands and like kind of in between brands and textiles and material suppliers. And then Veronica, actually a founder, head of a brand, and also an investor. And so we have kind of three different perspectives of what it's going to take to move us towards a better material future. But I think Stuart's going to jump in with questions.
Yeah, I'm going to, these
really
great.
I was just going to say, we're going to do some like questions that we prepped for everybody, and then we're going to leave time at the end for just open discussion.
Yeah, so let me just frame this up first. Those are great intros. I think kind of the crux here on what we're talking about is a lot around like biofabrication. I would love to kind of just throw it out to all of the hosts here. Like, what is biofabrication? What is sort of the conversation around moving towards bio-based materials? What does that look like? Can you guys kind of like frame up maybe even like a general history of it? And kind of conversely, like what's kind of facilitating that? Is it, and what has sort of been the limitations of these sort of traditional textiles? And how does biofabrication kind of address that? Would love to hear what everybody thinks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would love to start to just think about how Modern Meadow defines biofabrication, really as the process of using biology to create new materials. It kind of sits at the crossroads of nature and technology. and really leveraging molecular building blocks of natural things in order to build materials. I mean, it's a pretty exciting new technology. If you think about the 20th century being all about really man learning to control chemistry, to be able to intelligently design, you know, polymers and all of those things, you know, as much as we hate plastics. But I think we have to remember that it comes from some serious scientific advancements, understanding how, you know, if I put these things together in this way, I'll get a material with these properties. So really having that understanding between structure and property relationships, and being very well able to control chemistry. Now in the 21st century, we're beginning to think about how we can do that with biology. So that's a new toolkit where we can really take nature's building blocks and control them enough such that we can, you know, control microorganisms in order to make those building blocks, and then also assemble those building blocks in new ways to make materials that we design from the very molecular level.
Yeah, so maybe, you know, so what Susan and them doing is so advanced and so amazing. I'd actually like to back up and talk about fabrics, first of all. I think, you know, where are fabrics from to begin with? I think in the olden days, I think one of the first things was natural materials. And the most commonly used ones is cotton. And there's also now with technology now that we're trying to develop hemp so that it's as soft as cotton, but there's other things like linen. In my brand, when we talk about naturals, we prefer to do naturals done better, which is organic version of whatever, because cotton, it uses 25%, sorry, 2%, 2% of all the farmland, but 25% of all the chemicals for growing cotton, and it uses a lot of water. So definitely organic cotton is much better. But besides the natural track, there's also the synthetics track, and which is in 80% of American clothes, unfortunately, it's polyester, which is plastic petroleum based. And then what has happened in the fashion industry, started mixing the two. When you mix something that's supposed to be natural, which can biodegrade, and something that's synthetic, it's very hard to recycle. With the polyester stuff, the best way for sustainability is to keep it in a circular track where you keep recycling it over and over again, and the natural ones you degrade. But I think both of these have their problems, even if you keep it in circularity, which is with naturals, when you grow it, you use up farmland, you know, we might want to use it to grow food. There's always this issue. So therefore, humans and Susan and have developed amazing things where you can do it in a lab and you can grow it in different ways. And this is where the real advancement is, because when we do things that are not the traditional way, maybe we do it in a less carbon intensive way, maybe we do it with less pollution and toxic chemicals running off. And you know, learning about the Modern Meadow story and other biofabrication stories is really mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think also, you know, the topic of biofabrication, if you kind of trace the roots to where the futurists really started exploring textiles, kind of started at milk protein, so using casein in the 1930s. So this is actually kind of like a Mussolini derived initiative, but they wanted to start experimenting how to use leftover milk to kind of create new fibers to perhaps replace wool at the time. So they actually used a lot of propaganda to push the idea of using milk in the 30s, and then right before the World War, we're actually supplying a lot of milk-based fibers for the military. So this kind of fascination about, you know, reusing protein to create new materials, I think it's really interesting to see how we've always been along that path. It's just up until recently, as Susan probably knows, where technology is really able to kind of bring that those materials to a specification which can perform in a certain way. Back then, milk fibers didn't really do very well on abrasion, so a lot of the fibers would break really easily. And then also looking at, like, you know, in the 1960s, specifically in automotive, where wool was the main material used in automotive. And actually there were lobbyists in the automotive industry, specifically GM and Ford, that wrote specs that prevented, let's say, the wool industry to kind of use that material, since these synthetic polymers outperformed them at every level. So they intentionally made it very difficult for natural fibers to be sold and used in this market. But now with research and technology, we're actually able to kind of reverse that and develop new materials, whether it is leather that's coming from biofabricated, let's say the beginning level of biofabrication, or even kind of like creating new cellulose-based textiles that are actually stronger than polyester. So, you know, being able to re-engineer the molecule and then extrude new fibers to kind of become stronger and more efficient that way. So I think, yeah, the future is more about like understanding where we want to be, where we want to position ourselves, and what the best application use is. I think, you know, looking at nature's model is very interesting to see how nature performed and how it does its thing. So how we can kind of take these cues and align with nature a little bit better than designing, you know, synthetic polymers that don't really align with that and don't biodegrade and kind of create havoc with our environment. So yeah.
And like, for example, I'm wearing this t-shirt. I chose it specifically for this. This is a tensile t-shirt, which is nothing mind-blowing or crazy, but this one, they made it in a silk versus the traditional tensile where it is different hand feel. So Louis Vuitton is using it, my brand is using it as well. I mean, it's a fabric that I very much like. But I think that even on something like a tensile, which is a wood pulp fiber, there's still new developments that are happening year on year. And developments in materials, it is super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So just kind of to summarize or recap there, because kind of our sub questions there were about the history of material development and material science and the limitations of traditional textiles. It's really is in your mind that the push into new materials and new material innovation has been from a sustainable point of view, and the limitations to traditional textiles in the past have been around strength, cost, sustainable environmental impact. Are there any other factors that come into why we need to look into biofabrication or cellular agriculture now? I don't know if that makes sense, but.
I think, I mean, using biofabrication, if you look at the platform specifically of what you can do, starting from the molecular level, building up a new material, I think in the future, we did a lot of case studies, even, or just kind of projections that you could theoretically create like an autonomous factory that makes materials, maybe say 10 years down the line, where if you're able to kind of program all your materials and design efficient production lines, you could have, you know, these kind of self-producing organisms that just, you know, pump out material as nature would, you know, like a tree outside grows naturally because of sunlight and, you know, goes through its cycles of going back into the soil and regenerating itself. So, I mean, I don't know why that couldn't be something that could also happen with biofabricated materials, where we can kind of set up facilities that are actually producing materials that are completely biodegradable, completely biofabricated, but are just kind of self-autonomous. So we don't really need, I mean, obviously there should be people monitoring the processes, but the idea that we can kind of use yeast, for instance, to kind of activate these materials and grow them autonomously could be kind of like an interesting idea as a platform.
I think also just the potential for innovation, right? Like as you get new building blocks to build materials out of, as you really rethink how you design a material. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we're inspired by leather is just because it's something that's really beautiful that everyone loves, but how do you reinvent that or reimagine it, right? It doesn't have to be in a sheet form. It doesn't have to be kind of built that same way, but how do you take some of the things you love about it and think about them in really new ways? I mean, that's part of why, you know, designers are so important in this, because they help to really rethink that, and then having the fundamental science behind it helps you to actually bring that to life.
Exactly. And then also like the processes that you decide to use. I think if you're working in the textile space, you know, rather than using traditional methods like weaving or just like regular knitting, where you're required to use all the material and go into cut and sew method, where you're actually wasting around 30 to 40% of the original material. In fashion, that's huge. You know, also in the footwear industry. So you've seen like brands like Nike and Adidas adopt technologies like 3D knitting for Flyknit or Prime Knit, for instance, But those processes actually require, basically zero waste. The only waste you get is about like a little bit of thread, which is like the cuttings from the machine. So if you're imagining the kind of processes you're using, then you can also start thinking about the materials that you input with those processes. Right now, all these shoes are made from polyester. Obviously, they're not biodegradable, but if you start thinking about using wool instead of poly, or even kind of these, spider silks or engineered materials, you can start thinking about, the end use or the performance of the material from a different process. So it's kind of great to see how you can work with process, material, and design all together, and science to really craft the future. Almost like a blueprint. You're able to start completely from scratch, and you could rethink the problem from the beginning, and then the final product is fully thought out, assuming you're kind of applying this like circular mindset to it.
That's awesome. Kind of sticking to this vein around like creating new textiles. Susan, maybe I can kick this over to you. It seems like one thing to kind of pull together new manufacturing processes, right? Like that seems like a normal, relative, like not easy, but like an easier thing to do, and something that we've been innovating on for the past, 2 centuries. But when it comes to creating like a new textile specifically, like what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing at Modern Meadow, and especially as you tackle this sort of like, I would argue that maybe outside of cotton, leather is like the most common or the most like prominent like major textile. What are you guys kind of experiencing here? What are some of the challenges that you're running into? And then kind of tying into that, what sort of the roadmap look like? How did you guys go from, okay, we can replicate collagen to we can make leather at scale?
I think for us, it's been a long journey, honestly, because there's a lot of really fundamental science that's had to be developed. I think the good news is that a lot of these tools exist, right? You can take microorganisms like yeast and you can actually kind of program their DNA. So those tools have come a long way in the past, 20 years. Synthetic biology is an entire field. At the same time, material science has come a long way. So we understand, if I make this kind of structure, I think I'll get these properties, and we've tried to kind of map that so we have some ability to predict what that would do. But I think a lot of what we've been doing is very fundamental science, just understanding the properties of proteins. These proteins behave this way, these behave that way, and how we might assemble them in different ways to actually make something new. I think taking that to maybe a more macro level is, one of the challenges for anything that ultimately goes into a consumer product like this is that it's not only about performance, right? I think scientists are very used to working in the lab with a certain spec to hit a certain performance. But then with a new textile, with a new material, you have to think also about things like look and feel, right? Is it desirable? Which is a fairly hard thing to define in a scientific way. So that's been one of the big challenges for our team, is just how we calibrate ourselves on what success looks like, and also, how we think holistically about a new material. The structure matters. The performance is, of course, necessary, like table stakes. I couldn't give Veronica a piece of clothing or cloth that just falls apart, right? So that's not going to work. But also, if it doesn't fall apart, but it doesn't look or feel very good, it's also kind of useless. So I think all those factors have been a real challenge. And then also really like working with our brand partners to help educate them, define what success looks like. I think it's one thing to say, if I could make leather but without any animal, would that be great? Like, yes, clearly that's awesome. But what if I could make a totally new material that was made with nature's building blocks and without any animals? That's a whole different conversation, I think, and just trying to frame that, paint a picture and a vision, educate people on what the technology can do is a part of the process that we've had to go through.
I think for my brand, we've been using some older materials, but mixed with like some new technologies. And one of the challenges that we keep facing is exactly what Susan said. Like, we have to do all the testings and all the wear testing, and not just can it sew up to a piece of clothing, what happens when it goes to the wash, what happens when someone wears it in real life situations. And for every single material that we have, there needs to be a lot of different testings, and we've come to trouble, and we realize, oh, when you wash it, it shrinks, or it has something has smell, or whatever reason. There's always something. And on my investment side, what I've seen is a lot of new technologies. all on the verge of commercialization. And it's really on the brink of like really great explosion of new technologies, but a lot of them are just almost there. Maybe it's in a lab level, maybe they can make it in a small scale, but what about producing rolls and rolls of fabric? They haven't quite gotten there yet. And actually what the whole industry for this needs are fabric mills that are willing to work with these people to develop these new fabrics and to test them out. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, and I think also like, application is very important, or like the context to where the material will be used. At Tesla, for instance, we were really trying to figure out how do we move towards like a fully biodegradable textile. It's kind of like the question, how do we get there? What problems do we need to solve? Is it even possible to do so given the regulations and the specifications that we need to pass? I mean, there's so many different tests that we need to pass in order for the textile to make it into a vehicle before it drives off the road. But we started kind of pushing that and saying, challenging the material engineers and being like, hey, can we rewrite the spec? Are there ways we could redesign seats to be disassemblable? So using like a design for disassembly solution, where rather than having, a seat that goes to the landfill when it's done after 25 years, you could actually maybe replace the textile every 5 years. And not just using some simple solutions to kind of take them apart without any glues. But then at that point, you can also, hopefully, assuming that that's, working with the engineers, we can write a spec that maybe can be 5 years. So it's designed with the material in parallel. So I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to push, is where sustainability, materials, and design go hand in hand, and how each of them complement each other. Because I think one idea is just slapping a material and saying, hey, it's biodegradable, cool, we've done our job. But I think the bigger question is, how do we design the system, which is from a design standpoint from the beginning, the material also in parallel, and understand the use case scenario. And I think from there, you're able to come up with some really cool ideas that might look completely different than what we're used to. So, looking at different technologies or processes that might actually get us there without having to commit to these massive orders. I think, like you said, Veronica, it's very difficult to get suppliers to commit at that scale. So if you could say use 3D knitting as your testing bed, you can get a little bit of material, knit some stuff out, some swatches, do your tests, and you're literally using zero material. You don't have any massive startup costs, but you can prove your point very, very efficiently and at a small scale. So I think, just being creative from that level, I think there's not a lot of designers that start from the material kind of foundation and then, design after that or run in parallel. I think a lot of the times materials are the end of like the last part of the process, where the designers do everything and you've got your glitz and glamour shots, but then at the end it's like, okay, just go slap on some materials, and we don't have time to actually get it into production. So we're kind of counterintuitive in that end. So I think now, looking at sustainability, we're starting to get creative and look backwards. It's kind of like reverse engineering the problem and starting from the molecular level, which I think is the beauty of it, where you can really create a completely new solution and idea and build it out from scratch with the appropriate partners.
Guys, that's super interesting. You both have kind of talked about something, or like touched on something around like the larger ecosystem and sort of the testing or the parameters or the requirements. Rodrigo, were there things in automotive that were like arbitrarily set up that we might need to like reimagine or like revisit certain like testing requirements, or was it just like basic like abrasion resistance and like fire retardant and things like that?
So there's like specific specs that are kind of, you need to meet them. But a lot of companies just use one spec generally. I'm not going to name what spec it is, but it's kind of like the benchmark, what everyone needs to adhere to. And that benchmark is to save time. I think usually a spec takes 2 to 3 years to rewrite completely, because you have to do all the testing and, you've got to get all these laws passed. So I think a lot of the times, just to save time, people just go with what already exists rather than challenging that or trying to figure out, well, what if we run this in parallel and say, we know it might not ever, pass testing, but what if we tried? We were able to get a blend of textile that was around 80% wool and 20% polyester that passed the specific spec. But that was kind of more, wool is more expensive than polyester. So cost became a thing and scale became a thing. And, color wear and fading, UV actually fades wool a lot faster than polyester because it's not as stable. So there's a lot of different kind of, variables that you're looking into. But I think if you just accept the variable, I think that's the thing. It's like we're trying to control so much what the material like how you've designed it looks like. Designers are very rigid, and once they see the vision, they don't change or shift or pivot. So I think it's just kind of like accepting that there are imperfections in nature, and that's just part of the material. So, you know, whether you're working with even like the engineered leather, I think you're able to get a very precise, you know, calibrated feel and look and texture. Whereas leather itself is very natural. You know, you've got like, you know, bug bites, you've got different, let's say, stretch marks. And I think that there's a beauty between both of them, but like kind of finding that balance to see like what, you know, what's the benefit of doing all these things. So I think, yeah, testing is one huge thing. But I think now we need to just be more flexible with allowing ourselves to accept the imperfection and maybe write specifications for imperfection, at least have some sort of cushion to allow ourselves to kind of do these new ideas.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna kick it over to you, Veronica, really quickly. And really looking at how retail brands are incorporating sort of material innovation into their product lines. Can you like kind of walk us through a little bit about how like the design and sourcing and production pipelines look like, and then sort of how you guys begin to prioritize like materials and you know, are you looking at like naturals being the number one thing that you're after? Are you looking at biodegradability, renewability? Are you looking at sort of overall carbon footprint? Like, how do you guys sort of create a hierarchy there and prioritize? And then what does that sort of design and sourcing and production pipeline look like?
Yeah, so for me, I made the decision to launch with a very comprehensive line. So we have everything from T-shirts to puffer jackets and pants and shirts and also, sweaters as well. So because I had such a wide range of products, I really use every single type of material that's out there. And I think I looked at it through a sustainability lens and choosing the materials which are the most sustainable, that is suitable for that category. So like, you know, for recycled plastic bottles, I found it much more suitable for a puffer than I rather put in a puffer than in a shirt or a T-shirt. So it really came from which products we wanted to make. And then as a new company, I see one of the questions is not with a lot of R&D. Oh, did I lose you guys? Oh.
Still here.
Hello?
Hey.
Still here.
So here.
Did I lose? Okay, sorry. I think, yeah, one of the screens paused. Yeah, so I think what we've done is I set off to do this brand knowing all these amazing things out there. Ooh. I'm going to stop my video, so might be better. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I set off with a very ambitious plan to use, you know, the coolest, craziest material out there. But what happened was really the R&D was either costly or it took a long time. So we went out to the market to find things that were readily available or that was a bit lower hanging fruit that was easier to target. As a brand, we have a denim, which we developed with our denim mill, and that's proprietary. And it's an eco denim and it's also spill proof. So if you spill coffee or whatnot, there's a coating on top. But as a brand, I am now talking to further technologies such as microbial dyeing, because dyeing process is one of the most toxic parts, and usually dyes are petroleum based. Yeah, can you guys hear me? Sorry. Yeah. Petroleum based. And so microbial dyeing is something that we're looking at, but that timeline is much longer. But, you know, part of it is just going out and looking for what's available out on the market. And actually there are a lot of resources of like different sites and different places where you can learn about these things. And some were kind introductions from people and some were cold calling. I'm like, that looks really cool. And I called them up and that's kind of how we tackle it. And I was lucky to have one person on my team who is our innovation sustainability manager. So I didn't study chemistry in school myself. And now I'm like learning all these chemistry, like, and I think it's been a really fun journey. And, but there's technologies which are possible already. It's just a matter of looking for it. And I think it's the same for, you know, Chloe and Tshirt for Thousand Fell. That's what you guys went out to do, like asking questions, like, what is this made of? What can it be better? What are the other options out there? And just challenging the people who are making it already. You know, going back to the original design is once we learn more about sustainability, learn more about materials and circularity, that's when we're like, oh, for example, my puffer jacket, right now we have metal buttons, but if we do the jacket again, I'm like, I want to change those buttons to be also PET so that the whole item is just one material. And when we do recycle it, the whole thing can go to a recycling system versus having manual labor or a person cutting out the bits and pieces that can't be recycled together. So this is really comes in the design side. And then what happens is then our designers like, no, but PET buttons are not so nice. Let's use the metal buttons. And like, you know, and it's always like that. And then of course, you know, then we get into the discussion what of pricing, you know, which one is cheaper and which one is more expensive. You know, in fashion, because of fast fashion, unfortunately, everything has been pushed to be so cheap. It makes it difficult. Like, people are very price sensitive with clothing, especially with COVID-19 now. People are, the first thing people cut is clothing. And I think for the whole apparel market, it's going to be quite a tough time. But we still really want to continue with, you know, research and development. And actually, this time of pausing is a good time to do research and development, and come back and present even better things for the world. I think people would be much more pickier as we come out of COVID, not just from a wallet standpoint, but just from an awareness standpoint that everyone on this planet is connected. And so I think brands in the future will have to do even better than what they've been doing. And another thing is, if more people do sustainable materials, then we have economies of scale, and so that we can source for things that are cheaper. You know, one example I always use is the largest zipper company in the world is YKK, and they have some sustainable materials, but if all the big fashion companies that do use them together go to them and say, hey, we need more, I think they would spend more time developing it, and maybe we would have more options at more affordable price points. So it's really getting more people on board on all these things that we look at. Yeah.
That's super interesting, and it sounds like there's a couple different stakeholders in the equation. It's mills, it's brands, it's designers. Susan, I might kick this over to you and ask you about ZOA that you sort of framed up, and it's Modern Meadow is that the material innovation and the biofabrication that you're doing, and then ZOA is the consumer facing side of things. Like, what sort of relationship do those two play? Where do you see sort of ZOA coming in and like helping move the conversation forward as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think originally we wanted to create a brand, like create kind of a place to house the story of the material, right? Because of some of the things that Veronica's alluding to. I mean, people actually are starting to care now, right? Where are things made? How are they made? And realizing that we have, you know, a powerful story, but also potentially a complicated story. We wanted to kind of have a place and a voice and enable us to educate people about like what that means. You know, Modern Meadow ultimately is kind of the company behind it and the technology provider. ZOA is really ultimately the material itself and the like the actual physical material that would then go to our brand partners, who would put that into a final good for consumers. I mean, I think in terms of stakeholders, right, having things like the G7 Pact, right, are a good starting point to start to drive the conversation. I think that's great, but it needs more definition. I mean, what you guys have done at Thousandfell is great to just really digest that and understand it. And I think that's pretty impressive, because I think a lot of brands are starting to really get interested in sustainability, but then a step two, maybe a phase two to that all is really, what does that mean? And how do they define it? What are the metrics? Kind of really putting more meat on the bones of those targets so that it's meaningful, and so that they can really demand from the producers something brand new that actually meets those goals.
That's actually a great segue into one of the questions we had for all three of you to discuss. And then really quickly, we'll pivot soon to some of like the all audience questions, because I know there's a few coming in already. But what role do consumers themselves and consumer preference have in demanding these new materials? So one of the biggest things that we found, and everybody keeps touching on it, is both commercialization's hard. for the new materials. So a lot of the things that Stuart and I tested, we probably tested 40 different things. They're not passing testing. We can't get them up to scale. So we could make 1,000 shoes a month, but we couldn't make 10,000 if 1,000 felt really took off. Or they're not strong enough. And so they're not as durable, and the length of time or the length of use of the product is not as long, which is therefore not sustainable. And I know from our conversations with you, Susan, those are things that you've had to design into and address from a development perspective for design teams for ZOA to make sure that it's, at scale, at cost, and durable. But beyond that, and once those are addressed, that we're really looking at, or I guess maybe a better way to phrase it is, how much attention are brands and material firms paying to consumers, and what can consumers do to push this forward? Or is it really just time, or is it money? What does it take to move material innovation forward?
I think with materials, I think it's a very complex puzzle to solve. I think the consumers have a hard time really grasping what's going on in the material space, just because it's like very chemistry or biology driven. So for them, it's kind of like this very abstract idea of what they're trying to do. They hear sustainability and it means bioplastic, but what is a bioplastic? They talk about the circular economy, but like what materials are they using in the circular economy? So even though like the consumer is demanding, I think new materials, I think it's also like the brand, or like the brand's responsibility to start working with companies that also have a large following and influence. And I think it's important because once you start kind of familiarizing the public with what is possible and what is available through case studies, then people start talking about it. Even though it's kind of like this far off vision, I think if you just show somebody that something is possible, it automatically becomes like, oh yeah, of course. Like, why isn't everything like that? And I think that's a very typical way that the consumer thinks, like, oh yeah, I've seen that this company is doing that, so we should do the same thing. For example, our friends at Parlay, when they launched the ocean plastic shoe in 2014, that was just kind of like an experiment. They just did that with zero budget. They posted a picture of some shoes made from, nylon fishing nets, and it was Adidas's biggest campaign. It went viral, I think almost 7 to 10 billion clicks. And that's just because an idea was out there. So all of a sudden now you're talking about recycled plastic, even though it's coming from, different sources, but now ocean plastic. So it's kind of like the narrative that we're painting, but also the information that becomes available to the consumer. So even smaller projects that kind of enable the access of information. So for ZOA, for instance, when you guys launch later this year, once that becomes a thing where biofabricated leather is real, that's a conversation starter now. Like, oh, we can actually do this. Why isn't everything like this? And I think it's just about getting these ideas out to people, and of course having everything backed up, but also even like introducing the idea at a very early stage allows for other companies to work together and solve the problem. As we see now with like the coronavirus, is like, look what happens when you bring everybody together to solve a problem. So why can't we do the same thing with sustainability? How do we get more ideas out there? Yeah.
So it's kind of like Inception. So you're saying like,
No way.
you have ideas and you're like, all right, we're going to run test pilots and we're going to plant these seeds in the consumer's minds. And then they're like, oh man, biofabricated leather, like why not biofabricated wool, biofabricated whatever. Got it.
In a way, that's how I've seen the market evolve. Just even working, I used to be a journalist as well. So seeing what happens when you plant information out there, how people respond to it. So I think if you're crafting the correct narrative, and you're putting like real products, prototypes even, I think people are like, holy shit. Even when you do like on the automotive world, you do a concept car and everyone loses their mind for what it can do, but they're just pushers. They don't even have engines. It's just kind of like a facade. So when can we start doing the same thing with materials? Create hypothetical scenarios of this is what we believe the future should be. Even though it's 20 years down the road, I think just by planting these seeds, you can start to create a spark of curiosity also for the consumers, and then they start demanding for it because they're exposed to these ideas.
That's cool. I'm gonna like pivot or not pivot, but like springboard off of that with everybody. What do we see sort of the future as material innovation looking like? Like what are sort of those near term launches, Susan, the Modern Meadows of the world, and then what's sort of that 5 to 10 year horizon, and then what's that like 20 years out if anybody wants to speculate that far out, or just like, what are you guys kind of excited about, and you sort of are seeing and are getting kind of really pumped about?
I mean, one thing that's really exciting is just that the world is paying attention to sustainability, right? I mean, we have some pretty bad news going on globally right now, and I don't think that's a good thing, but I think the silver lining could be that, you know, we're becoming more aware of, you know, the human impact on our environment. We can see now when people are like staying home, what kind of good that could do in the world. I think already, you know, with everything that happened in the past couple of summers, with heat waves and everything, people are actually paying attention to sustainability, and it's becoming something that people care about. So I think that just really helps to drive behavior. I mean, one important message I think from our team would be, it's a journey, right? We're not gonna maybe achieve the holy grail from day one. You know, Rodrigo can paint the picture and that's where we're heading. But then we have to chart the path to get there. And I think opening up our minds to say, okay, we're gonna take steps to improve and get better along the way is one message that I think consumers can hopefully get behind. We may not be able to deliver a holy grail material on the first day, but we wanna take the right steps. So I think that's a part of it. I mean, I think also just that these material technologies are actually getting ready to a point where they actually can scale, you know, or perform and then scale enough that we can use them and then keep going from there. With that greater adoption, I think just standards change, right? And people can open their minds to something new. So that's kind of where I think it's going.
Yeah, I think everything takes time. You know, the first time I bought a pair of leggings made from recycled plastic bottles was 5 years ago. And, you know, at that time it was really unheard of. And it's finally, people are like familiar with it these days. So it even for something so easily graspable, it takes time. And then the other part is just, it relates to marketing actually. How does a brand market it? You know, tensile, which I'm wearing, you can use the word tensile, or you can say, oh, eucalyptus fiber. And when you say something like eucalyptus, people feel like it's more more interesting, or you can spread the message faster. And same with orange fiber, which we are working with, you know, the story that using leftover orange peels to make a silk-like fabric. You know, there's some certain types of science people are just, it's just easier for the regular everyday consumer to grasp and understand. And so those would also help push things forward. And in terms of like what other new technologies that are out there, I've invested in a company that adds some kind of a probiotic enzyme thing into plastics, or certain types of plastic. And it can time control when the plastic will break down, and eventually the plastic will break down into biomass and not microplastics. And that plastic is still recyclable. So right. There's like these new technologies that's out there. You know, there's companies which take silk and they make it liquid, and then it can be added even into cosmetics, because cosmetics usually has a lot of petroleum-based fillers inside. So silk is a natural material, better for your skin as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the range of applications out there are a lot. And as I said earlier, microbial dyeing and, you know, microbial weaving and all these, yeah, there's lots of cool things.
Exactly. And I think it's definitely that's the point. It's like, how do you make this topic very easy for the consumers to digest? I think if you start throwing chemistry at them, it's going to be like, well, what are you talking about? You know, what is this chemical composition and what is it supposed to do for me? But if, like you're saying, orange fiber or this textile is made from seaweed or algae or whatever, it at least introduces them to the idea. So when they start hearing it over and over again, they kind of familiarize themselves with the topic.
Yeah. For my brand, I forgot to talk about my brand. For my brand, we have one, which was a pair of trousers that's partially made from fermented sugar, and that fermented sugar is made from agricultural waste. The chemistry and all that behind it, like, it's too complicated for me. But if you're an everyday consumer, I posted on Instagram, and I had a friend who's like, "Can you lick it? Can you eat it?" Like, and then these are the ones that like get people excited, and yeah, part of it's marketing.
Totally. Yeah. And for us, right, for instance, we're focusing a lot on packaging. And I think we've seen that packaging is a very easy entry point for consumers to touch and feel and see what materials look like at that level. We're working with a company here in Venice, and we're actually developing, it's the first corrugate that's basically made from biomass. So we're actually using 60% algae and then using the rest cellulose blend, recycled cellulose, and we're creating like a paper, but that's also created for the cardboard. So instead of using recycled cardboard, which causes a lot of emissions, we're actually extracting algae, which is kind of like plugging the lung of the planet, if you will. Like our oceans are getting clogged up with algae. So by removing it, we're actually letting the oceans breathe and kind of absorb more CO2. Also for the trays and the packaging, we're working with an injection moldable kind of potato pulp. So it's very rigid when you receive it, but you can actually run it underwater. And after like, a minute in hot water, it just becomes nothing, So it's kind of like these ideas, but the texture and like the feel and the aesthetic is also very important. So for us, it's like, how do you design these kind of aspects into the material? So when you do receive it, it's still very premium and a very luxury experience. And it's unlike anything you've ever seen, but you're still talking about this bio story where like, look what's possible if you take an extra year to develop a box rather than just ordering it off the shelf from, Uline, which is a very easy solution. But I think when you get a brand that's committed to developing new materials, then you start coming up with really amazing solutions.
I think that's a great segue to a couple of the audience questions that have already been asked over the chat. And Chloe, do you want to moderate those? I'll let you kind of
actually, if anybody wants to just unmute themselves and ask a question, perhaps next time we'll open it up for audience questions first, so that you don't have to listen to Stuart and I for 30 minutes. Caroline, do you have a question?
I have a couple of questions. This was a really great talk, and it's really interesting to me. I'm not at all in the industry, so I have a few questions, if you guys don't mind. I put them in the chat, but my first question is how it feels like it takes a significant amount of R&D capital to truly invest in a new innovative material development project based on the new user needs you're kind of trying to define and validate. Because like what Rodrigo was saying is you can keep the spec the same and that would be the same kind of verification, but what's the validated user need that you're trying to appeal to in this industry? How can people efficiently do that, whether they're a startup or not? Just how can you efficiently innovate that kind of stuff? And then I guess the other question is more about like a long-term break-even point, both economically and from a carbon footprint standpoint. Is there any kind of data or modeling that shows, projects of such and such undertaking or for this kind of a project would, ultimately cost more than it would be, worth in the long run or things like that?
Totally. Maybe I can start with the first question. So I think getting into, the capital side, the capital intensive side of developing something new. I think a lot of the times there's still a lot of resources you can access that are off the shelf. I think there's not that many resources that kind of guide you in that right direction, but there are a lot of companies right now that are, developing these new materials and are ready for market, are ready for scale. I think it's just a matter of having a little bit of a budget. I mean, you can, let's say for this packaging project we're developing, you just need around $10,000 capital investment to design the tooling. And then once you have that built in, then you can actually produce the trays and the whole box for under $1 a piece. So the accessibility is there. I think it's just the information that's not really there. I think we just need to have more resources available for everybody to be able to pull together and have access to these new companies doing new things. And also maybe looking at what it actually does cost. Maybe packaging versus, footwear is a completely different study. So maybe there's some sort of, program or data that allows you to understand what it costs, or what kind of investment you would need to bring a sustainable material or product to market.
And then sometimes we just go to the mills and kind of like charm them and say nice things. And Chloe and Stuart, you guys do it too. Like, please help us. We're a startup. We just want to try this. And the other times you go and talk to them and get them excited. It's like, oh, let's develop this. It's going to be big. And hopefully there'll be partners that would be willing to work with us. And sometimes it's really down to that.
Yeah, I actually think from like the startup point of view for that question, I think it's kind of interesting that Susan's on the call. The onus of material innovation hasn't really been on brands, at least in the way that Stuart and I have functioned and what we've seen with Gap and other bigger retailers. It's really material innovation companies like Modern Meadow or mills that are putting the money into this new material development.
It's more sourcing the materials rather than developing them yourself.
Yes. So it's about sourcing them. And the problem is that sourcing is really opaque. It's hard to source. There's not like great databases. Like material sourcing is a global industry, and then there's a lot of testing. And the other problem is that a lot of these newer materials, again, aren't at scale. So you're sacrificing price, so you're paying 2 or 3 times more, or you're sacrificing durability, or you're not able to make quite as much as fast as you would like a traditional textile. But those are kind of 3 inputs that I think ZOA is trying to solve.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly the case. And we found, you know, brands aren't used to paying for the innovation. They kind of see the world of people like us more under the lens of like suppliers, right? Not really innovation partners. So that's definitely been a challenge for us, just finding the right brands to work with in the early days who understand the opportunity and who actually want to partner around doing something more innovative and thinking about sustainability from the very beginning and how we design that into a material. But I think along with that obviously comes cost, I mean, which we thank, you know, investors who support us because they have a really broad vision for that. So that's part of it. But also, you know, there's kind of a holistic reevaluation of where materials come from and what are the true costs of these things that needs to happen at some level. But I mean, I think the other piece of it is for us, we know that to make real impact, we have to have a material that can be at an affordable cost. Otherwise, you know, we're very niche or luxury or something that's not really applicable to everyone's day-to-day lives. And that ultimately really limits the impact that we can have. So, I mean, we've been focused on creating technologies that are scalable, that we can produce at cost that people could afford, that maybe in the early days are more expensive, but in the long term, we see a path to getting something that's realistic to be used in a whole wide range of things. But I think, you know, I think everyone needs to reframe their thinking around how do we solve some of the problems that are facing our world. Like, we can't continue to buy super cheap Gap clothes and also get something that's new and innovative and more sustainable. I think those 2 things don't quite go together, but it is hard. I mean, because you do, you know, there's all these cheap things out there. So it's hard to like really transform, I think, the mindsets of people.
And one of the things that I've observed too is that, you know, the supply chain holds the key to the price as well. A lot of the times you work with a lot of middlemen, different tier suppliers. Like if, for instance, you want to create a final textile, there's somebody that's doing the spinning and somebody that's producing the fiber and someone that's selling the produced fiber. So there's a lot of kind of like in-betweens that you don't really know about. So a lot of the times, unless you've got the direct source of where it's coming from, you're really usually getting price gouged. A lot of these companies throw 2 or 3x on top of that just because it's the, you know, the innovative commodity. But if you're able to go straight to the source, like a Modern Meadow, you can develop the material directly with the source and the supplier, rather than having to go through a middleman who's basically adding their costs on top of that, which raises the price exponentially.
And,
so
and it seems like the middleman would raise the carbon footprint of the whole manufacturing process.
Totally. You've got to ship to one place to another. I mean, a lot of the times it's easier that way from a logistics standpoint to have one company just take everything and then distribute it. But I think a lot of the times when it comes to innovation, it slows down the process quite a bit. You know, instead of looking at a really quick turnaround, you know, you spend 4 to 6 weeks just for like a sample turnaround. And that's common, but like, you know, if you're working with the middleman, they've got to also wait for the material to arrive to them to then ship it to you. I mean, it's kind of all these extra steps. So a lot of the times innovation also is hindered just because you're dealing with all these kind of in-between sources that you're not even really aware of what their role really is. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a big point too, is just simply that when you think about new technology, it's kind of unrealistic to think that on day one, it's going to be as cheap as these kind of capital depreciated industries that have been around for hundreds of years, right? I mean, people have been producing textiles and that's totally scaled, and there's no new infrastructure really going into that. So you have to understand that as you produce something new, there will be an initial cost. Totally. Just to do that new thing. I mean, that comes down over time, and then we get to a whole new world where we can produce these things at scale and we're not paying for it in the same way. But yeah, I think we forget that, like, even when it comes to the specifications and the requirements and the supply chain, these things are all kind of historically locked in. They're not necessarily great. They're just what we have. So they might not even be the right thing to compare it to as we think about something new.
That's a fantastic point. So we might, and that's part of, really quick, and then we'll get to any other last questions. It's part of with Thousandfell. Are we even comparing our old system, linear economy, make, take, waste, to this new system? And when you're thinking about price, if you're investing in something that can be recycled and remade, do you even look at cost of goods as a company the same way? Because that initial material purchase might last longer. Any other audience questions? I know it's getting late on the East Coast. And we've lost a few people to calls. Okay. Is there anything else, Rodrigo or Susan or Veronica, that you guys wanted to leave us with about the future of material innovation, or anything you're just excited about?
Yeah, I think right now is a really beautiful time to like rethink everything. You know, this coronavirus, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but it's been a really nice moment to just kind of stop and think about, you know, the future and how we can kind of make a better impact. I don't know if the coronavirus is aligned to the environment in a way, but it really, for me at least, it feels like it. So really trying to position ourselves, especially for you guys, Thousandfell, you've got a really amazing opportunity to kind of reset with that upper, you know, with that baton in hand. So I think, yeah, just moving forward, I think there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff out there. And I really hope that sustainability becomes bigger than we've ever seen it. And hopefully a lot of smaller companies are able to get access to these materials, and hopefully they can develop these materials at a smaller scale without massive capital investment. So, because I think, yeah, the small companies are the ones that are going to be leading the trend, especially because they could pivot so easily. So really excited for the future.
Exactly. I'll just leave us with one. It's not a real quote because I don't remember it exactly, but we were in a retail think tank last week, and the final shared hypothesis or theses was how this current COVID situation is reminding us all about the power of individual action, and that each one of us actually does play a role and can make a difference. And I think we sometimes forget that in the larger day-to-day. But the larger impact this will have on sustainable design, consumer demand for sustainable products, and being thoughtful with what they purchase and how they live or what they prioritize post this. So I think it's definitely the right year to be launching ZOA. And for all your projects, Rodrigo, and the relaunch of your brand, Veronica.
Yeah, I think this time gives us a great opportunity, so that's exciting.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much for joining. And we said it in the beginning, and we're still working on it, but we're gonna try to post this so people can download and like re-listen and share. And I'll make sure to like follow up with everybody either on Slack or over email.
Cool. And if anyone has questions, just feel free to get in touch. Yeah. I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah, we as well. I think we have a hello@Modern Meadow, so anyone can email us about any questions. That would be awesome.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Kyle.